check yours.
You want to try hitting play on that again?
Wait. Oh, gosh. Yeah, I'll put it on.
You spelled it right, that will help.
It says we're streaming.
Is that on YouTube?
It goes to YouTube.
For that American treasure to be treated as many other special branches of knowledge are treated. And that when a branch of knowledge is recognized as a jewel in the crown of any culture or any tradition, one of the things that happens is that scholars come around that tradition and they say we need to study it and preserve it and deepen it and increase its effectiveness and understand it. That's what scholars can do, is help us all understand the great treasures that we share among us and the treasures that change lives. So you'll have, often with branches of knowledge, you'll have a PhD program or a series of programs that develops around that branch of knowledge to advance the knowledge in that part of life. And we think that African American preaching deserves that kind of attention. Certainly preaching generally does, but we think that there's something special about African American preaching in particular. Not that we want to think in a limiting way. One of the things that Dr. Thomas has brought in terms of his leadership, and Dr. Allen, I might add, is to say that African American preaching is special, but it is a special gift to the human race, to everyone. There is something deeply rooted in the African American experience which needs to be honored in this field of knowledge, but not only for the sake of African Americans, for the sake of all people. And there's a kind of special exchange that can happen cross-culturally when particular cultural treasures are recognized and then studied and then shared. So I mentioned Dr. Thomas already. When you're having a new idea for a new program, you need a visionary leader. And that is not yours truly in this case. It is Dr. Thomas. As you may know already, I'm sure many of you do know, that Dr. Thomas is really, I would say, the dean of African American preaching right now in the United States. There are many luminaries, many jewels in that crown, but certainly Dr. Thomas is one of them. And his work has already made a huge impact in terms of advancing the field of knowledge that is African American preaching. To his right, of course, is Dr. Ron Allen, who has been a wonderful leader at CTS for decades with respect to preaching generally. The combination of the two is just extraordinary. And we want to take advantage. Not only do they have intellectual horsepower and expertise to offer, they also have a deep and abiding friendship and a scholarly partnership. That is a unique opportunity for any school. So when we ask why would we do this, it's because of the treasure that is African American preaching, a treasure for all people. But why at CTS? It has a lot to do with Frank Thomas and Ron Allen and the whole faculty here at CTS. We're all so excited about this program because of their leadership. So that's where I'll end my remarks now and turn it back over to you, Frank. But I'm just excited and honored to be at this table and to be with you, those of you who are listening in.
So thank you, Dr. Bolden. And I want to ask if Ron Allen, my esteemed colleague, anything you would like to add to, we're relaxed here, so anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think this is just a remarkable moment in the history of academic life, because this really, the initiation of this program is really the launch of a new discipline. And from henceforward, there will be conferences and books and tabs in the library, all organized under the discipline of African American preaching and sacred rhetoric. So that's an important thing to remember. A second important thing to remember is that this is a program that is going to focus on the practitioner scholar, and Frank is going to say more about that later, but I want to say that with respect to bringing together a critically informed lens on the practice of preaching and having those two intertwined from start to finish is going to be one of the unique features of this program.
Thank you, Ron. And Brenda, anything you would like to add? I'm a full participatory host.
We're just really excited about the program. We've already, received a lot of interest in it and have hopefully gotten all the information you need up on the website, or at least phone numbers where you can call and get more information. So, if you have questions that aren't getting answered through that information through this informational session, then let us know, and we'll try and get those questions answered.
Well, I want to talk a little bit, and all of us, about the mission of the program. And while we have a very nice, formal academic and reason for existence of the program, I like to talk about it in just a little bit different terms, or as a movement, or as a journey, or as a cause. I call it a cause. And for me, and I think for us as well, this is not just another academic program that, as Ron has said, we're trying to launch, in essence, a field of study, which is tremendously exciting. First, I think this is how education and the academy moves forward. At critical times in history, there have been an addition, an academic field. That's the way knowledge moves forward. African American preaching has been understudied, under-resourced, underpublished, and so as a result, some of the genius of the African American preaching tradition has gone to the grave with many preachers because it's traveled in the oral tradition. And so it's significant when you bring it out of the oral tradition into trying to develop in a written, because you preserve materials. And there are so many materials out there that are papers. And just this weekend in a conference I was in, we were asking questions about the papers of Dr. William Augustus Jones, a preeminent African-American preacher that has gone to glory. And so where are these papers going, and how do we keep track? And so in many denominational archives, in the basements of many churches, in the personal archives of many families, are these materials that could be resourced and developed and researched to really, as Ron has said, make a contribution to the practice of preaching, not only for African Americans, but generally for the entire preaching community. So we're on a journey. So I want to answer quickly 4 questions. It won't take me long. This is, I call it, for lack of a better phrase, my stump speech that I give everywhere to everybody, because not that it is a stump speech, it's just, it helps me to talk about it in ways that are moving and significant for me. So we're on a journey to establish African American preaching as an academic discipline. We believe that African American preaching in all of its beauty, insight, depth, imagination, history, and power can stir a preaching renaissance in America that can lead to the revival of American Christianity in the 21st century. This word, preaching renaissance, I just love the word. It fires me up every time I think about it. That in some circles, given the increasing secularization of our culture and the declining significance of Christianity, we hear lots of this concern and discussion, and that the growth of Christianity is going to be happening in the global South because, in North America and in Europe, it's declining, and the main lines are declining. I think this is a wonderful preaching opportunity. I'm not discouraged at all. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to really preach and proclaim the gospel. And so African American preaching has such wonderful treasures that I believe that we can stir a renaissance in preaching that will indeed revitalize American Christianity in the 21st century. In other words, somebody said, that's a big dream. I said, well, why shouldn't we have a big dream? I mean, so if we hit the moon, if we have a big dream and we accidentally hit the moon instead of the sun and the stars, we still would have reached a great place. Why are we going there? So I told you where we're going. And so to generate a preaching renaissance that will revitalize American Christianity in the 21st century. Why are we going there? We believe that we can develop preachers and teachers of preaching who stimulate and provoke the preaching renaissance by loving their preaching and preaching their very best, causing others to do the same. We are excited. We want to generate preachers and teachers of preaching who love their preaching and can inspire and fire up other people to love their preaching, preach their very, very best. And someday, if God is gracious and the Spirit of God is kind, a preaching renaissance will explode on the landscape. Who is going with us? My first question was, where are we going? I just said to you why we're going there. Now, who's going with us? We say any and anybody who has a love and desire and a passion for high-quality preaching and believe that sharing the genius of African-American preaching tradition will impact and lead to more effective preaching in our nation. One of the questions we continually get is, do you have to be an African-American to be a part of this program? So what we say is any and all who have a love, desire, and a passion for high-quality preaching and believe that sharing the genius of the African-American preaching tradition will impact and lead to more effective preaching in our nation. You believe that? Come on over here and get with us. And then finally, how will we get there? We have received accreditation from the Association of Theological Schools that we're very proud of, and we believe and know that we have a high-quality program. What will help us now is prayer, referral of high-quality students, positive words about our program to important people in your life, and then finally financial resources, because we're still working on this financial aspect. As many movements, causes, visions, you got the vision before you had the finances, but we're working on that. We're working on that in prayer. So that's the mission of the program, and since I've been talking a long time with you, could I ask you to talk about the difference between a PhD and a DMin?
Be happy to. We understand that the fundamental purpose of a DMin is to help an individual minister or congregation improve his or her preaching. There can be many paths to doing that, but it really is focused on strengthening the work of the local preacher, often with an eye toward doing so in a particular context. In a broad sense, the difference between the PhD and the DMin is that the PhD prepares the student to do two things. One is to help others improve their preaching by, two, drawing on the history, theology, and other informed resources that can help revitalize preaching in a broad way. So, whereas the DMin would study literature, forms, techniques, modes of analysis that are particular to him or her and to his or her context, the PhD student needs to have a grasp of the history of preaching, especially African American preaching, its theological expressions, homiletical theories and forms, cultural considerations, and how to bring these analytically into the service of understanding preaching, and then to articulate this understanding in classrooms, in books, in articles, in scholarly conferences, in lectures at the church, and in workshops or paths to preaching for students who may never go to seminary but who want to receive some formal instruction in preaching. There is a high value in the PhD program placed on being able to engage in original research. In the context of this program, that will often be original research in dialogue with other students, so you're not out there suspended by yourself. But when push comes to shove, developing high research, high communication, high teaching skills are all important values for this program.
Thank you, Ron. We're going to ask President Bolton to talk to us about the practitioner scholar and the cohort model.
So this program has many signatures. One of the signatures is an emphasis on what we are calling the practitioner scholar. So let me just briefly speak to that. As you know, traditionally a scholar is often understood as a person who is contributing to a field of knowledge. They become deeply acquainted with that field of knowledge. They're acquainted with some literature. They're contributing to that literature in their own writing. That's typically what a scholar means and scholarship means. A practitioner, on the other hand, is someone who is engaged in a particular practice. It may be a professional practice or a vocation to which they are called. There is a movement within the academy to try to connect those two. They have been connected in different ways throughout the history of theological education and education generally. But one way of connecting them is to think in terms of a scholar practitioner. So someone who is a scholar, but who is very well acquainted with the field of practice. And preaching has often included that kind of a figure, a person who is a scholar, but also either was a practitioner or does some practice on the side or is familiar with the world of the practice in question, in this case, preaching. What we want to do is reverse those terms. So not scholar practitioner, but practitioner scholar. Think about those who are deeply committed to the practice of preaching in their own life, in their own experience. They may be working preachers, as we say, but who also have intellectual gifts, the kind of intellectual and academic passion and horsepower that would lead them to be able to write and study the field and the practice of preaching. So we don't want to limit this program to practitioner scholars, but we do think this is a distinctive signature, that there are people out there who are great preachers already or who want to become great practitioners of preaching, but who also are so deeply connected to the scholarship side and advancing the field of knowledge that they want to put those two terms together. They don't want to be a scholar or a practitioner, and they don't even want to be a scholar practitioner who's primarily a scholar. They want to be a practitioner scholar, someone who's deeply connected to preaching and also advancing the field of knowledge that is African American preaching and preaching generally.
May I interject?
Please.
We believe that reflecting on the practice of preaching, especially in context with others, will be a generative source for scholarly work, and that will open up avenues for research that are quite different from beginning with history, theology, and homiletical theory. Begin with practice, what you're doing and what others are doing now, and perhaps voices from history, and see what these practices raise that are issues these practices raise that are ready to be investigated, and whose investigation will then contribute to the broader understanding and practice of the phenomenon.
That's a lovely addition and additional dimension of our thinking with this program. You heard Dr. Allen mention studying with others, and that's another signature of this program. We call it the cohort model. Any PhD program will involve cohort learning. So you're coming in with other scholars in the PhD program. You walk through the program with them. That's true of any PhD program. But we want to put a special emphasis on it, partly because of the practice emphasis that you just heard Dr. Allen speak to. We really believe the best way for these scholars to learn together, these practitioner scholars or these scholars generally, will be to learn from each other and to move through the program in a cohort. So what Dr. Thomas is really wanting to do with, of course, colleagues like Dr. Allen and others, is train the next generation of practitioner scholars in African American preaching. And so we think we want to do that by training a cohort through the program that will start together, finish together, God willing, and move into their careers as continuing preachers and scholars and so on together in a cohort. We think that's a powerful model. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but that's the second signature I wanted to name in addition to practitioner scholar, this cohort emphasis.
And what I'd like to add to that is that this is why we're speaking of it as a movement, that a cohort, you get a movement. You know, traditionally in many PhD programs, and both of y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, you generate one or two scholars into the program, and in some sense they form a cohort. But this is so new and so fresh, and we just think if we could have a sizable cohort moving together, and if that cohort moved out of the program into the world, we would have a significant impact. That's why we're talking about a preaching renaissance. That's why we're talking movement, and we're talking cause. Well, I can see that questions are coming in, so we will get our part done. We want to talk about admissions, and I would like for Brenda, who is our admissions guru, to share any, or you don't have to, all of the requirements, we can talk about some of those, but, at least you help design the application, and so how they can get to the application, and then anything else you want to say as our Vice President of admissions.
Well, I'm focused on the mechanics of how you go about applying and turning in your application and all the documents to go along with that. You would start with the page on the website that just gives you all the requirements. Start there, and you'll see links to different forms. you go into the application, you can create an account, you can start it, and you can work on it some, and then you can save your work and then come back to it. And we recommend doing that because it's a long application. There are a number of documents that you will need to attach. There are links within the application itself where you just upload the PDFs for those documents. So you'll want to make sure that you kind of keep the checklist with you as you're working on the application, and double check yourself because there's quite a bit that you need to turn in with it. But like I said, you can take your time, not a lot of time because our deadline is August 1st, correct?
August 1st.
And so it's just a lot of material to get in that amount of time, but you can work on it over a period of time. There's also several references that you'll need to request, and your reference, the people who are providing those references, you can just send them a link to a form, and they do that online, and then that is turned in automatically when they submit it. So there isn't paperwork that anyone has to mail in. There is one piece you do have to mail in, though, and that actually may be multiple pieces depending on how many institutions of higher education you've studied in. But we need to see all your transcripts. Even if you don't have a degree from someplace, we need to see all transcripts. So please, you can start working on that right now in terms of requesting that your undergraduate institution or any place where else that you've studied in GradWorks can send us the transcripts. They need to come directly from the institution. You can't request them or make a copy of what you have in your files and have it come from you. You have to have it come from the institution.
May I add one more thing that may be very important to work on? A score for the graduate record exam for within the last 5 years is a requirement for admission. If you have taken the graduate record exam, the GRE, in the last 5 years, just pop the ETS a request to send your score here. If you have not done so, you need to make arrangements soon to take the GRE. There are GRE centers all over the country where you can take the GRE by computer, and it will generate your score almost immediately. But there are a limited number of seats available at these centers. So you need to get that process going as quickly as you can. Chances are there's a center fairly near you, and if they have a seat, you can just walk right in. But you do need to have in mind that the GRE score needs to be in Indianapolis by August 1st. So the sooner you look for the center and make the appointment to have your place and bring your computer, the better.
And we're particularly responding to questions that we've received prior to or just in general. People ask about GRE. They also ask about language requirements. Ron, would you speak to the language requirement for the program?
Yes. There are 2 language requirements for the program. 1 semester of Hebrew and 1 semester of Greek. These semesters can be completed if you took Greek and Hebrew on your MDiv or at some other point in your educational career, then chances are you took a year and chances are you have enough transcript information to satisfy this requirement. But if you have not completed one or the other of these languages, we ask that you complete 1 semester of study by the end of the language, by the end of your first year of classwork, and the other language by the end of your second year of classwork.
Thank you, Ron. Generally, a 3.5 GPA. So we won't go through all of these. You can read them on the website in the application. So we won't spend a lot of time. But we did want to flag those simply because we get so many questions around language, GRE, and GPA. We continue to get those questions. The rest you can see. You need an essay, and you can view those. Right. We want to speak to finances for the program, and I'm going to ask President Bolton if he would speak to that. We do have the financial information on the website, but we'll let him share with us.
Sure. So yeah, I encourage you to think in financial terms, even at the outset. I imagine that most people who apply for this program, probably all people who apply for this program, will be passionately interested in preaching. But let us also be passionately responsible about how we think about all of these requirements, including finances. So all that information is available for you on the website. Let me say just a brief word about it. PhD programs are all over the country. They range widely with respect to how financial aid fits in. So on the one hand, there are PhD programs that are available for, you have to pay a tuition, and there's no financial aid available. On the other side of a spectrum, there is PhD programs where you don't pay any tuition because it's all covered with a fellowship, and then sometimes there's a stipend on top of that. So you get that, and then there's lots of PhD programs in between. So we are in the middle of that range. We have some financial aid available, and there'll also be, for most students, some need to pay at least some of the tuition. You can see the figures laid out on the website, in particular, tuition and other kinds of fees. Those fees are significant, especially for the first 3 years of coursework. And then when you move into the dissertation stage, when you're doing the research and writing your dissertation, then the tuition fees are lower during that period of time. And typically most students will finish this program within 6 years or thereabouts. So I encourage you to look into those details, but that's the general shape. We do have financial aid available. The director and, of course, our team that is working with recruitment and admissions can work with you with respect to your ability to pay and some resources that you can pursue in terms of scholarships or grants or loans. Loans are available for this program through, that is federal loans. You can apply for federal loans for this program, so that's one option that we can explore with you. So reach out to us, ask questions, examine the website about finances, and then be in touch with us so that we can be as supportive as we can to you.
Thank you. We have one other question going back to admission requirements. We get a lot of questions about the residency requirements, so I've asked Dr. Allen if he would respond to our thinking about the residency requirement.
Well, every PhD program has a residence requirement, and sometimes that means you have to pack up where you are now and move to a university town, a seminary town, and live there on campus. It happens that we are considering residency here as a matter of face-to-face interaction on a class and on an instructional schedule that allows you to continue to live at home and come to CTS for 1 week intensives 3 or 4 times a year. So you would not have to give up your place of residence. You probably would have to make some adjustment in your wage earning situation because the demands of the PhD program are not going to be mind-boggling and back-breaking, but they are considerable, and to honor God, you will want to do the best work that you can do. So we have a residence. In comparison to most PhD programs, the residence requirement is 2 years. You take a high number of courses in 2 years. We have extended the time within which to take the basic 42 hours of classwork over 3 years, most of which involves coming to Indianapolis, being in a face-to-face intensive for 5 days, and then returning to your home. That's the skeleton.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so before we open it up to questions, we seem to have plenty of questions. Anything, Brenda, you want to add, Dr. Baldwin, that we've missed? Do you think we've covered it all? Anything?
One thing you haven't mentioned are the affiliate faculty.
Yes, yes, yes.
I think it would be good in synoptic form to mention the phenomenon and who they are.
Yes, it's very difficult to have the expertise for this PhD program local. We have 3 wonderful Homiletics professors, you're looking at 3 of them. But also, we have affiliate faculty around the country who are involved in the program who can help us, some of the brightest and the best. I try not to call names just yet.
Okay.
But we do have them. Just not yet. We haven't asked their permission to put their name out. So there's a lot of different kinds of things here that constrains us from this moment. But soon.
But they are committed to the program.
Yes, we're committed to the program, but we haven't asked their permission.
Right,
So we think it's best to hold that information. But you'll see that soon. It'll come on the website. And we have questions that are being passed to us. So I'm going to ask either Brenda or President to, since you all are reading them.
Well, here's one you might start with, Frank. The question is, what are some of the challenges inherent in seeking to complete this degree while maintaining a full-time pastorate?
Oh, that's a great question. We should put that up on the website. One of the ways that we have thought about, one of the most difficult things is time, as Ron has alluded to, time management. Because to be faithful to the program, it's a considerable amount of reading, thinking, researching, etc. And if you are a pastor, to balance those times are going to be difficult. I did a PhD as a pastor, so I can speak about it from experience. What we have kind of been thinking about, it would be helpful to have the support of your congregation for this endeavor, that the congregation would allow you time, would understand what you're doing, would support what you're doing, and allow you time away, because it's going to be, sort of a juggling act. And we have even thought about, we haven't gotten this far as to have some sense that the seminary, you, and your congregation, if you're a pastor, are all working together to support you and will allow you the space and time to be able to do the program. So I think that it would be helpful to have that negotiated and talked about, because it's an excellent program, but it's going to require time. And you're probably in a wonderful ministry. It's going to require time. And then you have a wonderful family, and they should have time and deserve time and want time. So to balance that out would be tremendously helpful, to find support, your family as well. And I think, yes.
I think there are 2 particular selling points here with regard to the congregation. Number 1 is you won't be away from the congregation for significant periods of time.
Right.
There will be about 3, 4, or 5 weeks when you're here, but it's not like you're being dragged out of the office and down to a campus 2 or 3 days a week. So it's a limited amount of time away. I think that would be a selling point to a board of elders or a board of deacons. A second is that everyone will need to find their way into a rhythm of reading and preparing toward the intensive week, and then following up the intensive week, usually with a major paper. And I think once you get a feel for the rhythm, that this will become a natural part of your life for the next 3 years, taking into account everything that Dr. Thomas has said.
Thank you. Okay.
Along that line, the expected calendar of on-campus sessions, there was a question about what the calendar would look like.
I can answer that.
Okay. I was going to simply say it's in the program overview from the website. We did a graphic that lays out time frames. With that, I'll then give it to Ron.
The backbone of the program is a series of 1-week intensives that will often be January, March, May, June, August, with the option of an October, or 4 out of the 5. So that would be the on-campus expectation, and you could structure your life around that.
So there'll be 14 classes, 9 required, 5 electives, and it would be 5 courses first year, 5 courses second year, and 4 courses the last year. Then, of course, the comprehensive exams, and then on to the dissertation. So,
Another question that came in was, how large will the first class be, that first cohort, which is a great question. Of course, We, as a team, will be looking very closely at the quality of the applicants, and so we won't want to pick a number, but rather choose the cohort class or first class that is most qualified and most fitting for the program. We do anticipate, though, a first class of somewhere between 8 and 10 students, something in that range. It will depend on the qualities and qualifications of those who apply. But we do already we've received a lot of interest, and a lot of very highly qualified candidates are expressing interest. So we're optimistic about that, and that will be about the range in terms of how many we admit. But we'll see when we get to that point of admission. So that was one question that came in. And Ron, I know there's a couple there that you might...
I have 3 questions here. Although I understand that the scope of the new program is geared toward a practitioner-scholar model, will this credential also qualify one to become a full-time tenure-track professor of preaching? And the answer is absolutely. You will be able to take a traditional route toward a professoriate, a full-time tenure track. You would be able to serve as an adjunct. You would be able to teach in a college, in a department of religion, or in some other capacity, serve as the chaplain of a college or an institution. You would be available to be a resource leader for church-sponsored paths to ordination involving preaching and other things. So this degree is an all-purpose degree, although its particular focus happens to be the practitioner-scholar. Many seminaries today are looking for people with the growing emphasis on practice and theological education who can bring these two things together in the traditional class and the innovative classroom. Additions to that response? Second question, since the name of the degree is African American Preaching and Sacred Rhetoric, would one after graduation be qualified to teach homiletics broadly understood, African American preaching, Latino American preaching, Euro-American preaching, etc.? And I have to say again, the unqualified answer here is yes. I think Dr. Thomas and I have known one another for approximately 20 years, and I have been impressed from the very beginning of our acquaintanceship with what I might refer to as his ecumenical or ambassadorial range of understanding preaching across cultures, even while understanding the culturally specific characteristics that are sometimes a part of particular preaching traditions. So in the graduate work, you would be exposed to these broad preaching traditions, but even more, you would get the research skills that would enable you on your own to pursue in depth any and all of these preaching traditions. Supplement?
Thank you. Wonderful.
And I have one last question. Will the program entail being taught homiletics via a live preaching class or lab? And I want to answer this question in 2 ways. Number one, the focus of the program is not upon improving your own preaching, although there will be occasions when PhD students will preach and respond to one another critically. But number two, each student will have an opportunity to serve as a teaching assistant in both the kind of traditional seminary teaching situation, I'll put an asterisk by that and come back to it, and also to teach in a situation in which some manifestation of the church, a congregation, a region, a conference, a denomination, brings together students who want to learn better how to preach but who are not seminary bound. Now, I said an asterisk with regard to the traditional preaching classroom. I don't necessarily mean a 14-week class. I mean a preaching class taught under the auspices of an accredited seminary for 3 hours of graduate credit. These classes are taking place in multiple formats these days. So it could be an intensive, it could be a 14-week, it could be something like a weekend class, or it could be some other format. But you would be exposed to contemporary pedagogy as it relates to preaching with the idea of becoming the best possible teacher that you can become.
That's good too, assistantships.
Yes. Ron has spoken to the traditional assistantships that are a part of a PhD program, and we've incorporated something that is very non-traditional in this program. And the inspiration for it comes from Fred B. Craddock, who was a phenomenal teacher of homiletics and preacher himself, one of the 12 greatest preachers in the English-speaking world at one point before he passed last year. And when he retired from preaching and teaching in the seminary, he went to the hills of Appalachia and taught preaching. Non-seminary trained preachers. I was so deeply impressed with that. That touched me. So I talked to these folks about including a component where if you are in this PhD program, you have to teach 2 semesters to principally non-seminary trained pastors in your community. You have to go outside. So in the African-American tradition, for example, the vast majority of pastors who are preaching do not go to seminary for various reasons. So we said if we're going to have a preaching renaissance, we just can't stay inside the walls of the seminary and teach preaching. We have to go to the community. So you will be required to do 2 semesters. We'll help you develop a syllabus. We'll give you some information on pedagogy. We'll help you learn how to critique a sermon if you don't already know. But we want you to go to the hills of Appalachia or to the community and teach preaching, because everybody has not had the privilege and the benefit of being able to go to seminary. And we want a preaching renaissance and not just a seminary preaching renaissance. We want to impact those who haven't been blessed like we have.
I have a couple just quick questions that I can answer. This information's on the website, but just to highlight it. There was a question about, do you have to have received your master's degree to be in order to enroll? And the answer is yes. You have to have it completed by the time you would matriculate into the program. So if you're working on a Master of Divinity right now and it won't be done, that would make you ineligible. The other question is education. Oh, no, the same one. There was a question about the financial aid and whether it be merit-based or need-based or how those decisions would be made. We're assuming everybody who's applying to this is of high merit. So it's really going to come down to more of a need-based focus. And there isn't a huge amount of funds right now, so we're encouraging folks to explore a lot of different avenues for funding the program because it's just, it's very popular already, and we do expect that everybody applying is going to have really high credentials.
The Association of Theological Schools does allow a person to apply who may not have an actual MDiv, but who has completed 72 hours of MDiv equivalency. And the Association of Theological Schools has a formula whereby to determine MDiv equivalency, and this information is on the application form.
Thank you. Is this PhD only for pastors or for associate pastors? No. Where's my statement? Anybody that wants to go with us, anybody that's committed to high quality preaching, learning about it, developing themselves to teach it, to do it, and who wants to participate in this preaching renaissance that we're dreaming of.
I might just footnote, it's African American preaching and sacred rhetoric.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
By sacred rhetoric, we mean the broad range of communicative expressions through which the gospel might be portrayed, which of course can include preaching, but other forms of expression as well.
Like?
Poetry, rap,
Like?
jazz. That would be a hard one to supervise.
Yes.
Visual media, electronic media.
Yes. Yes. So we call that sacred rhetoric. Okay, for references, who should we solicit from as practitioners?
So, sure, I mean, typically in a program like this, the references are from our academic references, or at least that they have academic heft and weight. So you might want to consider, if you're a practitioner, you might want to consider a seminary or divinity school professor that you had in class, or someone who knows your work, who also knows the life of scholarship in the academy. So it might be a colleague who is a professor, or another practitioner who has, either in his or her own work or her associates, has some deep familiarity with the life of scholarship. So I think that's what I would think about for references.
Now, the application form calls for 2 academic references and 1 practitioner reference. So 2 people of the kind the president mentions, and then someone who can testify to your capacity as an ecclesial leader.
Another question is, when we think about GPA or grade point average, the GRE exam, reference letters, which of these is given the highest priority in weighing the application? I would answer that question, yes, that all 3 of those, they really come from different angles. You can imagine in an application process like this, you're really looking at a diamond, right? Every applicant is a jewel, and you're just turning that jewel, looking at the jewel from different angles. GPA is one angle, but only one. GRE, a rigorous exam is an angle, but it's only one. And then references gives another angle. And by the way, the whole application provides some other angles of reference as well, or other angles of view. So I think all 3 of those and other dimensions of the application will be very important, and really equally important, I would say.
I think we're looking for we haven't really talked about this quite this straightforwardly. Looking for someone who is bright, passionate, disciplined, and if I can put it this way, has a kind of attack dog mentality when it comes to going after this material.
I like that.
Self-starter, right?
Self-starter.
Initiative and
Capital S, capital S.
self-starter.
And one of the ways that I talk about this, if who have a passion for preaching, and so if you have a passion, you do it as a hobby. In other words, if a person applies and they haven't read any preaching books, or they haven't self-started themselves into the process. So when I went into the PhD program, I already was doing work in preaching. I just happened to transfer it into a class, and the class brought me and expanded me. So, I think it's important that you're a self-starter and that you've already started in some shape, and that our program can kind of add to or help you develop what you've already started.
Speaking of that, there are a couple questions that have come in around the residency requirement. We did talk about that earlier in this session, but maybe it bears a little more repeating. If you are a self-starter in the sense that you can get to Indianapolis for these intensive courses, that is the residency requirement. There is no requirement here that you have to leave your place of where you reside and move to Indianapolis, but there is a requirement that you are here for those classes, those intensives, which happen 3 or 4 times a year, depending on the year. So there's several visits to Indianapolis. So if you're in range, whatever your travel vehicle of choice is, if you're in range of Indianapolis for those intensives, that will be the residence requirement. It's face-to-face education here in Indianapolis. There'll be some connection online as well, of course, but this is being in the presence of Frank Thomas, being in the presence of Ron Allen, and that is the residence requirement. So I just wanted to say that and make sure we're clear in this presentation, because a couple questions came in about the residency requirement.
And CTS does provide housing on campus and meal service at least much of the time.
And they're reasonably priced, too, so you can take advantage of that as your budget allows. So are those the questions we have in front of us?
One more?
Okay, we have one more question just came in. This one will be good.
Well, this question is coming. I might just say, for those who come to Indianapolis and stay on campus, we have a great old house, and I can imagine cohort members just really developing as a community In fact, maybe even having difficulty going to bed at night because you're staying up so energized by talking about preaching.
We just got a question that said, I just turned 50. Am I too old? And then, not kidding. I got my PhD when I was 53. I started a PhD program at 48. It was 5 years. I was 53 walking across the stage with a PhD. And so I debated this too old question for a very long time. And I think it's about passion, not about age. I think it's about what you feel called to do. 50 is pretty young these days, as long as we're living, which means you have a substantive time of ministry left. Plus, 50 also, one of the things that helped me, I was in the class with some younger people, but based upon life experience and the pastoral experience that I had, I picked up things a little bit quicker, or I learned how to find stuff faster. And I think they had to do with age and seasoning, and so I think that's a value more than, no, it's not too old. It's never too late.
Mm-hmm. Just in case you're interested, Plato, of all people, Plato thought you really shouldn't start your education until you were almost 30. And that's just getting started. So there's something about life experience. Now, we are not going to discriminate against any age group here, but we would love to see people in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s, and certainly 50 is not too old. Really, there's no age that's too old when you're thinking about the gospel and thinking about the treasure that is African American preaching and preaching generally.
Anything we've missed? I'm going to start with you, Brenda. Give everybody. We promised till 1:30, but it seems like our questions have ceased. That means we've done a great job communicating, both written and in this session. So maybe we could do, okay, our final kind of sum-up comments, anything that you want to share. And Brenda, we'll start with you. Anything you'd like to?
I think, like I said earlier, I think all the information's on the website. If you have a question, though, and you can't find the information, feel free to contact us. And we've got the contact information there. You'll either be directed to the Networking, Recruitment, and Admissions Office, or sometimes known as Student Services, or to the Center for Pastoral Excellence, where Frank has his office. So we'll route the questions based on the type of question. But we're here to answer them.
I'll just say this, and this is a bit of a bold statement, but I'll go ahead and end with boldness, that I really believe that the story of Christianity in North America, at the heart of that story is the story of African American Christianity. I just think there's something very special about that history. Not in an exclusive way. Of course, African Americans have always been in dialogue and connection with other cultural groups. But I think there's something very special about that sacred history of African American Christian centuries here on this continent that is very special and is a treasure for the world to benefit from. So I'm delighted to be nearby as Dr. Thomas and Dr. Allen and so many others are moving forward with this groundbreaking and inspiring program.
Want to add anything?
Well, I've never thought of myself as a midwife before, but in a sense, I've been midwifing with Frank this process, and this moment in which it is coming to live birth just seems to me a thing of the Spirit.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And I think my final comment is we hope that in this moments that you spent, first I apologies that we got late on YouTube, but we will make a video available somehow, I think, to you so you can capture the whole thing. Particularly an eloquent piece by a president needs to be seen. At any rate, I hope in this that you've gotten a sense for the collaborativeness and how excited CTS is to have this program housed in its place, and the sense of synergy and work and effort from all departments, Ron and the faculty. Brenda symbolizes the staff, the president, the board of trustees. This has been one collaborative effort to present this program, and we just believe that It is going to be phenomenal, and it will be something that will change preaching. We just believe that. And so we're looking forward to our first class and maybe a second class after that. We believe that. And then also into posterity, so that this program will outlive all of us because of its vitality and strength. We thank you, and I would be remiss not to thank our tech team, and we have a bunch of folk in the background that you can't see, ongoers, cheerleaders, question answerers, technicians, camera people who are holding cameras, and our dean is over in the corner over there, so my wife is here, and we gotta go, but just the kind of support that has been given both to me and this program has been phenomenal, and we think that we're off to a great start. The application is on the website. We close the application period on August 1st, and we intend to have a starting class in January. So please consult the website. You can email your questions to phdquestions@cts.edu. We also have an email. Our admissions ad will be on the website. But if you just take your pen and phdquestions@cts.edu, we'll be happy to get back to you and respond to your questions. Well, team, anything else? Well, we have a word of prayer, and we thank you for your time, and we know that you're prayerfully discerning. So we want to pray for you as we pray for ourselves. And so now, God, we thank you for the beauty of people who have signed on online to ask questions, people who didn't even ask questions, but who are viewing. Thank you for their interest, and so may you guide them to the very best application, the right people and the right resources. And so we thank you for the gift that you've given us of this program. We intend to be great stewards of your mercy and your grace, God. I thank you for CTS, its staff, its faculty, the trustees, the students, all the people who make this community such a vibrant place, God. We thank you for it. And now we end the prayer. It's in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. And let everybody say amen.
Amen.
Amen. God bless you.